Hi everyone, I'm going to do a live reading of Chapter 1, The Light at Dawn by K.L. Montgomery, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Part 1, Angelia. 1. Angelia. Lake St. Clair, New York. The pink sky yawning over the lake was the first thing Angelia noticed that morning. She passed by the picture window at the top of the stairs on her way downstairs to make breakfast and pack lunches for her 3 children. The color was so startling. She froze in place as she drank in the image of dawn warming into view, reflected in the vast silver mirror below. I should really take a photo, she thought to herself with a smile. She slept restlessly, some family squabbles between herself, her husband, and her mother-in-law still rumbling through her mind when she retired the night before. Dean was angry, so he'd slept on the sofa. Another night of sleeping apart, she mused with a head shake. But it's hard to be upset when there's a beautiful sunrise like that. With every dawn, God shows us we have a brand new chance, a fresh start. Riley would drive herself and her brother Jaron to school, while Evan would board the bus at 7:25. Glancing down at her fitness tracker, Angelia realized she needed to snap out of her daze and get moving. Their house would soon be a flurry of activity, and she needed coffee if she was going to keep up. She made her way down the stairs and briefly paused in the foyer when she saw the pink light that swept over the lake was now spilling through the stained glass in the front door. It had intensified during her passage down the stairs. That is the strangest color I've ever seen. It's like if pink and orange had a baby, she reflected. She fisted her almost waist-length toffee-colored hair, her most distinguishing feature, and piled it into a messy bun on top of her head before continuing into the kitchen. The other side of her house was still dusky blue, unaffected by the sunrise that transformed the front of her house into a coral-colored lake. Maybe it's salmon. She'd barely turned on the coffee pot when footsteps lumbered down the stairs. "Mom! Riley's still in the shower," 14-year-old Jaron grumbled. "She's using all the water." Hot on his heels was 9-year-old Evan, pushing past his brother to scramble into the kitchen and up onto a bar stool. "Hey, watch where you're going," his older brother chastised. "Mom, can you tell Riley to hurry up?" "Pop-Tart, please," Evan said, his cherubic face pulled into a grin. He had sleep in his eyes and his toffee-brown hair was sticking up in all directions. "Oh, Evan, can you please choose something a little more nutritious?" Angelia asked as she took a broom from the pantry and banged the handle against the ceiling, which was the floor of the upstairs bathroom. It was her well-known signal to move it along. Her daughter would understand. "Pop-Tart and a banana?" Evan tried again, still grinning. Angelia smiled and handed her son his breakfast. "I'm glad someone around here is a morning person." He beamed as he crammed the entire corner of the strawberry frosted pastry into his mouth, a bite so large that crumbs tumbled out as he chewed. "Ew, that's disgusting," Jaron sneered as he grabbed a jug of orange juice from the refrigerator and took a swig. "Not as disgusting as drinking straight out of the carton. How many times have I told you not to do that?" Angelia fired back, shaking her finger at her middle child. She rammed the broom against the ceiling again and followed it up with a shout. "Now, Riley!" She heard the water shut off and turned to start packing up the kids' lunches. She glanced across the granite countertop and into the living room, a vast open space crowned with wide, floor-to-ceiling windows on the far end. She gasped in a breath when she realized the eerie pink color she'd seen before had brightened to something even more beautiful, a golden, peachy pink that seemed almost unearthly. She wouldn't even know what to call that hue, not even if she had the biggest box of crayons ever made to use for a reference point. The next 20 minutes were a whirlwind of chewing, swallowing, stuffing things in packbags, and frantic steps down the stone steps to meet the bus. Angelia watched the bus, silhouetted against the lake in the now golden sun, as it pulled away and drove off to the elementary school on the other side of town. It was fall and only a few weeks into the school year. Angelia's husband and his parents were still adamant that they should pull Eben out of his public school and send him to the private Catholic school only a few blocks from their house. His elementary school was going through a lot of changes. A few teachers were let go the previous year, and there was a new principal. The school board had been almost entirely replaced in the last election. Angelia understood her husband and in-laws' reservations about Eben's current school, but she just didn't see how they could afford the private school tuition. Her in-laws were offering to help with the costs. They insisted she didn't care about her son's education, when the truth was she just wanted to make sure they could keep paying bills and putting food on the table. She had a small home business decorating cakes and cupcakes, which she loved because it allowed her a lot of flexibility and time with her children, but it didn't bring in a lot of cash. But maybe it's time for me to get a full-time job, she reflected as she headed back into the kitchen. She glanced at the calendar on the refrigerator they used to keep track of all the kids' extracurricular activities. It was only September 25th. 3 months till Christmas, she thought. Surely everything will settle down by then. She heard her phone buzzing against the granite countertop as she came inside, clutching the long leash that led to Buzz's collar. Her older son had a fascination with Buzz Lightyear when they got the dog years and years ago. Now he was aging and in poor health. She chose to fill up his water bowl and let the call go to voicemail. Mid-morning calls were nearly always spam or a scam. After finishing, she retrieved her phone and brought up her voicemail, putting it on a speakerphone while she warmed up her third cup of coffee. She could tell by the pause and crackle at the beginning of the message that it was a robocall from one of the kids' schools. They were always calling whenever there was a new fundraiser or PTA meeting or if report cards were going out. Angelia didn't think much of it until she heard the words active shooter and lockdown. A bolt of panic shot through her body, zapping her with a force strong enough to knock her off her feet. Heart thrashing against her ribcage, she replayed the message, wishing she could slow it down to the speed at which her brain could process each bit of information as it was churned out by the principal's quivering voice. Do not come to the school. We repeat, do not arrive on school property. A reunification center has been set up at the public library. We are in the process of transporting the evacuated students there by buses. Again, at this time, we urge you to cooperate with the authorities and first responders on scene and not approach school property. They have secured the area and need to do their jobs. We will advise you of further information as it becomes available. Her phone rang again while she was frantically running through the house trying to find her keys. Dean! A deep breath inflated her lungs as she pressed the button to say hello. All her husband said was, I'll meet you there. Time moved forward in jolting jerks instead of a smooth, fluid progression. Finding her keys and purse was like wading through quicksand, but when she arrived at the library across town, it felt like she'd been magically transported. She didn't remember 1 second of the drive. Her stomach was in her throat, acid churning as it threatened to make its way back up. Too much coffee. The parking lot was crammed full. Gleaming SUVs and sedans sparkled under the mid-morning sun as she made her way down a long row of them to the sidewalk. The adults filing into the building all looked to be in a trance, performing a death march. No one was saying anything. On the curb were 2 sheriff's cruisers and a state trooper SUV. The wail of sirens blurred in the distance, blending in with a few squawking birds overhead. Angelia scanned the throng of anxious parents for her husband, but didn't see him. He worked in the next town over, so it would take him longer to arrive. Their town was small, but with the lakes right in the middle, all traffic was funneled onto the roads that circumnavigated the water. Angelia! A female voice called from behind her. She whipped around to find Evan's best friend's mother with tear-stained cheeks. No words were needed as the women crashed into each other with open arms. That was when the first round of sobs struck through Angelia's body like an earthquake. I can't believe this is happening, Tammy said, pulling back. Her mascara had run down the sides of her face, the war paint of a mother bear whose cub was in danger. I know. Where's Dan? He's out of town this week. Can you believe it? Business trip. Tammy shook her head. He doesn't get the calls from the school, so he doesn't know yet. You didn't tell him? He's on the West Coast. I don't even know if he's awake yet. Her voice trailed off as a state trooper stepped out of his SUV and turned to address the crowd of parents. The buses are en route. I know this is a scary and uncertain time, folks, but we ask that you be patient as we reunite you with your children. They're pretty shaken up. In that moment, Angelia cringed as she was bombarded by images of what it might have looked like in the school when this attack started. But there were too many blanks she couldn't fill in. The school's message had only said there was an active shooter on campus. She didn't know if it was a teacher, a student, a stranger. She didn't know if anyone had been shot. The same questions rose up from the crowd at the precise moment they hit her, all spewed at the trooper with the force of a hurricane. The broad-shouldered young man remained steady. We don't have a lot of details at this time. We ask that you remain patient so we can make sure all the information we give you is factual. He's lying, a man in the back shouted. I heard there were 3 fatalities. I had 4 and 6 injured, another man volleyed back. A woman near the front of the crowd screamed out before collapsing into the arms of those around her. Then the mass of bodies devolved into a moving, murmuring parade down the sidewalk. What they were marching toward, Angelia was unsure. This number of people couldn't possibly fit inside their small municipal library. There had to be 100 or more parents assembled, with more cars arriving by the minute. She spotted Dean way down the line in the empty gravel lot used for overflow for the city's performing arts center next door to the library. Wonder why they didn't put us there, flashed through her mind. Because it's Wednesday morning and no one is there right now. Her husband's long legs carried him swiftly to her side, where he swept her up in his arms. There were no words. They had to wait. The buses began arriving in a long line like a big yellow circus train. Angelia shook the idea of a circus from her mind, but so far that was what his had become. Angry parents, shouting deputies, the poor librarian seemed to surrender the building to the invading forces, and all Dean had done was squeeze her hand. He didn't even seem capable of looking at her. The first bus to arrive had the youngest kids. They're just babies, Angelia gasped, looking at them scramble off the bus, their little shell-shocked faces scanning the crowd of adults for their mummies and daddies. Can you even imagine how frightened they must be? Her mind filled with a vision of her 9-year-old son, the third born. He was outgoing, animated, virtually fearless. She envisioned him sitting on one of the fake leather bus seats, holding the hand of a younger student. Maybe it was a little boy who was crying, afraid. She could see Evan being his comfort in their time of uncertainty. The thought of that warmed her heart while she waited. She knew only 20 minutes had passed since she had arrived at the library, but like the time that elapsed between the phone call and her drive, the clock didn't seem to be moving forward at a steady pace. It was a rushing river one moment and a stagnant pond the next. She grasped tightly to her phone in case it might ring, but she was afraid to go on social media like so many other waiting parents were doing. She was afraid of what she might see there, what rumors might be spreading, what horrors might await. As parents and students reunited, the general mood among the crowd slowly shifted from panic to relief, but so many were still waiting. The second bus emptied. Some parents hugged their kids so tightly she didn't think they'd ever let go. She couldn't blame them. How many buses would there be? She wondered, trying to occupy her mind. She knew there were roughly 500 students divided amongst the 6 grades. Each bus held 60, She wasn't sure. Maybe 8 buses? She wondered if Dean's mind was spinning with similar computations. Before the third bus unloaded, 5 more state troopers arrived. When they climbed out of their cars, she saw 2 were in uniform and the others were in regular clothes. Detectives, maybe? They conferred in a circle near the flagpole. The looks on their faces were bigger versions of the expressions worn by the children emerging from the buses. They had obviously come from the scene. They hold the answers to what is happening, what is going on. As if that realization simultaneously dawned on everyone else on the premises, a collective silence fell upon all but the parents reuniting with the now unloading third bus. Maybe Evan is on this bus, she tried to be optimistic. Dean had let go of her hand and finally succumbed to the siren call of social media. He held his phone out to her and she caught a glimpse of someone's post in the familiar Facebook feed layout. She only saw the words, "Killed 4 of our babies," before she felt the coffee violently erupt, racing up her esophagus like a volcano. She shook her head and dashed toward a row of bushes at the side of the brick building, where she promptly lost her battle to retain the acidic liquid. As she made her way back to Dean, she noticed he was moving toward a crowd that had formed around one of the men she guessed was a detective. She pushed her way through a few people to stand next to her husband, expecting him to take her hand again. He didn't. "Folks, I'm Detective Brant Wilson, New York State Police." He was an older gentleman with a bit of a bare belly spilling over the waistband of his khaki pants, a bushy grey mustache, and a plaid tie flapping against his white dress shirt in the September wind. "I'm so sorry we are gathered in circumstances like this, and I'm sure you're all anxious to know what is going on. There's going to be a press conference set up here in just a few minutes, and you're going to notice some of the local television stations arriving soon. But I wanted you to be the first to hear what we know so far. I have a granddaughter and Adirondack Elementary, so I'm just as invested in this as you are." There was a pause as he cleared his throat. There was no doubt the mention of his granddaughter caused him to choke up, and a fresh tear stung at Angelia's eye as her heart went out to the man. "Father, please give him your strength. Please help him get the words out," she prayed, no matter how difficult they are to say. The American flag whipped violently against the metal flagpole as he took a deep breath and began again. "At approximately 9:32 this morning, a white male, 44 years of age, arrived on campus armed with at least 2 guns and opened fire into the main office and then down the hallway toward the classrooms and cafeteria. He made it to the gymnasium where a PE class was finishing up before the assistant principal, Jeremy Phillips, apprehended the suspect." Detective Wilson swallowed down another tear as he continued. "I'm sorry to report that Mr. Phillips lost his life, saving the lives of his students. He was able to wrangle both of the suspect's guns from him as he was shot, and the guns were picked up by the teacher just as officers arrived on the scene. Police was able to take the suspect into custody without incident. Mr. Phillips is a hero and sacrificed his life to save the children he loved so dearly, and there is no doubt more lives would have been lost if not for his selfless act of bravery. I know you are all concerned about other fatalities and injuries, and I'm sorry we don't have firm information about that at this time. Rather than mislead you in any way, we are waiting for the first responders to do their jobs and report back to us with any update any minute." At that moment, a uniformed officer stabbed him on the arm, pulling him aside. Angelia's heart pounded against her ribcage as she struggled to read their lips, but the angle of their mouths made it impossible. The first TV station van pulled into the parking lot as Detective Wilson turned to address the crowd again. We have just had confirmation that there are 3 fatalities in addition to Mr. Phillips, and that 7 staff members and children have been transported for medical attention. It's not clear yet if they are at the local hospital. He paused again as the uniformed officer gave him more information. At least one has been lifelined to the University of Vermont Medical Center, and few others have been transported to Lake Placid, with the remaining taken to our local hospital. Angelia flashed back to the helicopter she had noticed flying away from town on her drive to the library. She hadn't thought much of it at first, as helicopter tours of the Adirondacks were popular, especially during the fall season. It must have been the medevac helicopter, she reasoned. Her heart was squeezing so hard in her chest, it felt like it might burst right through her rib cage. Her lungs burned, nearly unable to inflate as Detective Wilson made another announcement above the murmuring crowd. The identities of the victims are not known. I'm sorry we don't have more information yet, but we will continue to update you as it becomes available. Detective Wilson turned to speak with the film crew that had just arrived. Seconds later, 2 other media vehicles pulled into the crowded lot, parking on the grass so they didn't block the exit. Angelia watched the crew carry in equipment as they began setting up inside the library, and some of the united parents and students followed them into the building. The parents who were still waiting remained outside, hopeful their children would be on the next bus. This is the one, Angelia thought as its doors squeaked open. She wasn't sure why, but she had the overwhelming feeling that Evan would bound down the steps and into her arms in a matter of seconds. She took Dean's hand and pulled him down the sidewalk closer to where students were spilling out. These students looked older than the first busloads. They were Evan's age, maybe 8, 9, or 10. In a flash, her eyes fixated on a little red-headed boy, Colton, Evan's best friend. She caught a glimpse of his puffy red face before his mother Tammy swooped in, pulling the boy into her arms. There was a teacher with him, holding Colton's hand until his mother snatched him up. It took a moment to register that she was Mrs. Rodriguez, her son's teacher. The petite Latina gave her an uneasy smile before turning to Tammy to tell her something Angelia couldn't overhear, though she strained to. Angelia's eyes returned to the constant stream of students emerging from the bus, scanning each face with the hope that one would match her toffee-haired, freckle-faced son, the child that of all 3 of her kids favored her most. Even as the last child stepped off the bus, a blonde girl who may have been a 5th grader judging by her budding pubescent body, Angelia still felt as though there must be one more child. One more student to come, and it had to be Evan. She felt a hand on her arm and glanced down to see it was her husband. One of the officers had formed a small cluster with Mrs. Rodriguez, Tammy, and Colton, and he was gesturing to Dean and Angelia to join. When her eyes shifted to Colton's blood-stained shirt, she knew. She knew in that precise moment. Evan was gone. The only thing worse than finding out her precious innocent son was shot was learning the information by seeing the blood on his best friend's shirt. There were no words. There were no facial expressions or gestures, no measures of comfort that could be even remotely adequate. The entire spectrum of human emotion is ill-equipped for conveying the deep, cutting wound of losing a child in this horrific, abominable way. And then she realized she would have to relay this information to siblings, grandparents, neighbors, friends. She would be stabbed again and again by this sadistic knife. She would face a world that knew she had 3 children. She would have to admit that one didn't make it. She couldn't keep him safe. A tragic tale was now woven into the fabric of her life. Inescapable, never healing. Angelia's body shut down in the wake of her challenge. Her soul buried itself under a block of ice so thick no ray of light could hope to penetrate it. She had no idea what happened after Mrs. Rodriguez confirmed her darkest, most disturbing fear had been realized. There were voices and arms around her, someone catching her as she fell. But she wanted to fall deep, deep, deep into a vast and endless abyss, drowning her shattered soul for an eternity. End of chapter 1.